Hello. So right now we're gonna be talking about how to analyze some hypothetical data for Project B. So if you're talking about Project B, we're talking about the pollinator project. Okay. So what I'm gonna be showing you here is hypothetical data. So obviously your data will be the real one. This is obviously just to show you a way to analyze your data. If you have a different idea or a different way to analyze your data, please feel free to share that with me and submit this so that I can evaluate how you're doing. Okay, so right now what I'm going to show you is basically two type of location. So if you see on the bottom left, you have mountain raw data, and I basically selected as an example, like if I'm taking data from the mountains, and as another location was gonna be the valley. So valley and mountains are basically the two locations that I use in my hypothetical experiment. Okay, so we're gonna start with the raw data. This is how suppose your data sheet to look like. Obviously, there's some information missing here that you should have more completed. We requested around 18 kind of pollinators per site. If you didn't get enough from one side, then from the other one, you should have gotten more data. Okay, so you probably will get here around 18 pollinators minimum, and then I just only gonna use show 5, and then you're gonna see here like a location name. So my location names are pretty general. Yours should be a little bit more specific, but it's just to give you an idea. Okay, if you saw any type of disturbance, make sure that you know that. So trail, road, or there was none. Okay, you put your day here. You can go actually back in time on the day and place that you were and find the temperature. This here, what I'm gonna show you now is the important part. So for mountain raw data and these 5 pollinators that you saw as an example, the first one here was a bumblebee. You do not need to identify this to like the species level, because there's like many actually different bumblebee species, but if you recognize that for sure it is a bumblebee, then you can identify this as a bumblebee animal. Okay, and then you can find on the internet the phyla, so that will be Arthropoda. And then I actually continue here, and there's another bumblebee that hypothetically I saw, Arthropoda here, then a honeybee, the phyla is Arthropoda, and so on. You can see that I also included here hummingbird, which is Chordata, and then the butterfly, which is Arthropoda. Now let's focus on the first organism here. So here you can see that the first plant that this bumblebee visited was a blue columbine. Okay, so remember you need to ID the plants, and then if you are able, you do not need to analyze this, but if you had the data, make sure to submit this, is to count how many flowers that bumblebee visited in this specific first plant. Okay, it is not required for this research, but if you have it, please feel free to submit that. Okay, however, if the pollinator moved to another plant when you were actually observing that first pollinator, and in this case this bumblebee moved to another columbine, so you can actually note that, then you can see that everything else after that from this particular row is empty, because that pollinator only visited 2 plants and actually they belong to the same species. Now let's take, for example, here this other bumblebee here. Okay, the first plant that it visited was the American globe flower, and again optional if you want to note how many flowers in that plant this particular bumblebee visited. And then the second plant that it visited was the yellow bee plant. Okay, and after that it didn't visit anything else. Okay, look at this one. This particular butterfly visited 3 different species, and I noted those there. Okay, so you're gonna be doing this in your data, and basically this is the data sheet that we provided you, so you should be having something pretty similar. And the only thing that is not required is basically this here, but again, if you have it, feel free. Okay, if you have more plant species that a particular pollinator visited, then please put that information there. And again, this was just from one location, which is the mountains. And then the other one that I'm gonna pick here is tab 3, is from the valley. So I'm gonna pretend that I'm in the valley. Okay, and then I went to these places for those particular 5 pollinators. Obviously, again, your location should be a little bit more specific. Mine is just very broad for the fact that this is hypothetical example. I put here a type of disturbance. Okay, if you put the date, the temperature, and then we go back here to the same style, we have a beetle, and then identify the phyla for that particular beetle, and then I found here what type of plant that beetle was visiting, and there is nothing else after. Okay, but if you look at this wasp, it visited one alfalfa. You can again put here whatever information you want. Obviously, it needs to be real data. If you do not have it, don't put it then. But it is important to identify if that pollinator visited one plant and if it moved to another one, even if it is from the same species, please know that. Okay, so alfalfa here and alfalfa there. So there were two alfalfa that this particular was visited. And then you can see that this sunbird visited this plant, and then this one here. So two different species. Okay, so you're gonna be doing that for your 18 pollinators per site. And again, if you didn't find the 18 in one particular site, you should have double or increase the amount of like samples in the other site then. Okay, so let's go back to the mountain raw data, right? And then you're gonna be seeing here that I created a tab that is called Analysis Mountain. Okay, so I'm gonna focus on the analysis from the mountain place. Okay, so here I made a little table based from that raw data that I show you, and I'm gonna put here the pollinator type, and you're gonna put the pollinators that you saw. Okay, for example, I saw bumblebee twice. You do not need to put here bumblebee twice. Just put bumblebees as a group, and then honeybee, hummingbird, whatever you saw. If you saw bats or something else, you put it here. Okay, then list here all the plants that were basically visited overall when you were looking data, for example, in the mountains. Obviously, you're going to be doing this for your particular traits, but for example, I took this information here, like all this and this, okay, and all this. So you see all the plants that were visited overall, and then basically place it here horizontally. Okay, now for example, the blue columbine, I actually can confirm with my mountain raw data. Oops, there it is. The blue columbine was visited by bumblebee. It was visited actually by honeybee, and it was visited by a butterfly. So you can actually put here X, 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 because that means this particular plant is visited by 3 different types of pollinator. If you look at the yellow bee plant, there's actually two animals or 2 pollinators, bumblebees and honeybees, that actually visit that plant. So you can actually go back to your raw data and you can see it here. That's true for the honeybee, and actually there is here one for the bumblebee. Okay, now this is just to mark again what type of pollinators are visiting a specific plant. You can actually translate the same type of table into numbers. Okay, so now that you have this table completed, you can put here like, okay, I know that bumblebees visited blue columbine, but how many bumblebees did I saw that were visiting actually that plant? So I saw 2 bumblebees. Okay, how many hummingbirds did I saw visiting the skyrocket? There were 2. Okay, so you have basically translated this table into this other table here, and because this one is numerical, you can actually analyze data here. So this table here is basically based on this graph here is based on this table here. Okay, so what I did was basically, and I can show you quickly, just to select this. Obviously, you're gonna be doing this for all your pollinators. I'm only gonna show you 5, and then you're gonna go. This is just in case I'm Mac, but it should be pretty similar in other computers. And you're gonna do insert, and you're gonna find basically, you can go to recommended tables, or let me just see. I'm trying to find this one here. Okay, here it is. So I like this one here, the stack columns. Okay, so you can see it's actually showing you something a little bit different from mine. So here in the X variable, you're gonna see the plants, and here you're gonna see the bees in the legend or the pollinators overall. I like to switch the column, and now this is more understanding. Okay, so this now looks like mine. So you can see bumblebees, honeybees, hummingbirds, and butterfly. And actually you can see how many plants of a particular species they visit. So blue columbine is the amount here for bumblebees. Honeybees overall visited less blue columbine. You can see the hummingbirds only visited the skyrocket, and so on. So you can see how nice of a graph you can get that basically represents all the pollinators that you encounter in that particular location and basically what type of plants they visited. Okay, so I'm gonna delete this one and keep this one here for you. Remember, like every single graph should have title and actually the axis label and a legend. Okay, so yours should be located and looking like this. All right, and then this one do not require error bars because we're basically doing numerical numbers and not, I think that was redundant. But there's no averages here. Okay, so you only do standard errors when you have error bars. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you here a summary of what is actually in this table. Okay, so I put the pollinators that I saw in the mountain, and then basically here I counted how many different species a bumblebee visited. So for example, there were 1, 2, 3 species of plants that this bumblebee visited. And then for honeybee, there were 1 or 2 species. And then for hummingbird, there was only 1 species here. And then for butterfly, there were 1, 2, 3 species. So you can see that's what it is. And keep that table here for now because we're gonna use it later. And then if I go now to the analysis of the valley, you can see it here. I did the exact same thing. So from the raw data, I was able to create this table here. And you can see that it has the pollinators, all the plants that were visited technically in the valley. Okay, yours might be a little bit longer here and you're gonna have more pollinators. And then marks with an X which plants these pollinators are visited. Okay, and then translate this table into something numerical so that you can actually get a graph. You're gonna be seeing here that beetles, for example, visited only 1 plant, and this is the common milkweed. The same for ants. Then the wasp only visited alfalfa, etc. So this graph here, same like I did before. I selected this table here, went to insert, and then selected the stack column, and it's gonna give you right away this here, which is gonna have on the x-axis the plants. Now it's up to you if you want to leave it like that, but I prefer, but this isn't for me only, if you switch the information here and you can see how it looks like, it looks now like mine, and then you have the pollinators here and you can see basically how many plants and the quantities they visited of different plant species. Okay, so it's up to you, but I really like this style. I think it's more clear. All right, don't forget the labels, the titles, etc. And I did the exact same thing here as before, which is just to create a summary of how many plant species these pollinators visited. So beetles only visited 1, ants only visited 1 species here, wasps same, only 1 species here. Then you look at hummingbirds and they were like 2 species visited, all right, and so on. Now you have 2 graphs here. You have 1 graph here from the valley, okay, and then you have 1 graph here for the mountains. You also want to do some type of analysis that is combined, okay? So remember those 2 tables that I did as a summary of how many plant species they visited. So there is one here for mountains and there is one here for the valley, okay? Now you want to combine these 2 and this is what it looks like. So the number of plants visited per pollinator. So you have your mountain information. You can see that this information here was put in here, and then you didn't see any beetles, ants, or wasps, whatever, in the mountains. And then you had the information for the valley. So in the valley, you didn't see, for example, bumblebees, you didn't see honeybees, but you saw like hummingbirds, and there were 2. Remember that 2 came from here, okay? And then you have the songbird here, 2, and then we're gonna have like the songbirds are here, okay? All right, now I created this graph here, okay, and it comes from that graph actually. So you have the graph here, comes from this table, And then basically this table shows you the two different locations, mountain and valley. And then basically it compares how many different plant species, just the quantity, not which type of plant, but how many plants this type of pollinators visited in the valley and in the mountain. Okay, so pretty easy to get just basically by combining these two data sets. All right, and then you can see these were the type of actually how many plants were visited by these pollinators and how many plants were visited by these other pollinators here. Okay, all right, and then there's another table here that is called the number of pollinator type per location. So basically here I just counted like how many pollinators, bumblebees specifically, were in the mountains. So you put 2, and then here you have 0 in the valley, and then you have 1 honeybee in the mountains, and then 0 in the valley, and so on. And basically I create a graph like that here. Okay, so this graph shows you how many pollinators I see per location. So this is more about diversity, and you can see that I saw 4 different type of pollinator and how much these were 2, only 1 here for all these 3. You can actually look at the colors of a butterfly was 1, hummingbird was 1, etc. And then you have the type of pollinators that you saw in the valley and actually their quantities. And this one here is basically combining all these different type of pollinators and put those into phyla. So I got in the mountains 4 arthropoda, and there were 3 arthropodas in the valley. There was 1 chordata in the mountain, and then there were 2 chordatas in the valley. And this graph basically is made with this table here, and you can see that in the mountains I have more arthropoda than actually in the valley, and in the valley I have more chordata than in the mountain. Okay, so if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and then I gladly will help you.